The topic is the politics of freedom as a necessary condition for Ukrainian victory. The key word here is necessary. The thing is that when we read Eucken or Hayek, those books describe that war became one of the factors to extend the state and to limit the freedoms. I believe that Ukraine is in a unique situation which can cause the changes, and the changes in Ukraine could cause global changes. That is why I called it the necessary condition for Ukrainian victory. On the 24th of February 2022, Russia launched a full scale invasion of Ukraine. The Ukrainian enemy did not leave to Ukrainians as a nation no right to life or existence, and accordingly, the Ukrainians had no choice. They had to withstand and to prevail. It was then that the Ukraine showed the wonders of solidarity, of self-sacrifice, courage, and heroism, and that undermined the enemy's plans to take even 3 days. Despite and that changed the development of the world. However, the first successes on the front lines inspired the nation, but subsequent failures and the actions of the government led to a certain, demoralization. Ukraine is in a difficult situation where we are facing a question of whether Ukraine will keep existing as a nation. And in a situation like that, a significant number of people are, not feeling the war economically, and they have withdrawn from it psychologically. Well, many citizens don't know anyone who is fighting at the front lines, and people have even stopped praying in churches. While in the first weeks of war, all churches prayed for Ukraine. Nowadays, in many churches, if not in most of them, there is some designated time for the mothers and warriors on Wednesday or on Thursday, but on Sundays, they're trying to not to bother people with the questions of war. And the question is, how is that possible? That's possible when the wonders happened during our first victories. We really felt God's hand there. The reasons may be different. Let us have a look at the conditions of unity for any community, be that a family, a nation, or something else. Well, in my opinion, three conditions are necessary. The first one is the presence of unifying values, the second one is the presence of agreement and common goals, and the third one is the readiness of everyone or the majority of members of the community to make a maximum efforts to achieve the goal. I think that the first condition is met here. Despite the Russian propaganda, Ukrainians have shown that Ukraine as a state is a value which is worth fighting for. Despite the fact that the bloody war has been waged for 30 months already, despite many thousands of victims, despite destructions of cities and villages, the majority of Ukraine and Ukrainians still believe that the goal is to resume and restore the territory of Ukraine within the borders of 1991. Why is there no readiness to keep fighting? Why, well, do we have less motivation to continue fighting? Reasons may be varied. There is the resource depletion, and there's also psychological exhaustion, and the losses are felt, and of course the Russian psyops work, and also other negative elements. But of course, Russia is not a mechanical opposition of the means and possibilities. This is an opposition of the will, of the mind, of the sweat and blood, the confrontation of all those. It's like a chess game. And the result is not clear and not guaranteed. So the reasons may be varied, but I see the reason in economic policy. If you remember, when the war broke out, there was this thought that the warriors are fighting somewhere there, and those in the rear have the right to keep living just as they used to. And it seems to me that that was the cause of this main result. But the present war has existential nature for Ukrainians. We are speaking here of to be or not to be in the future, of whether we will be Ukrainians in our native Ukrainian land. And the enemy announced that they will destroy all this. And when the war is of existential nature, it is important to concentrate as much resources as possible to exterminate the enemy, to use these resources as efficiently as possible, and to minimize any kinds of unproductive expenditures which are not connected with the actions on the way to the victory. Item number one is relates to the political elite. And when I speak about the political elite, I'm not only speaking about the official government. It starts from the president and goes down to each volunteer. These are everyone who can persuade and organize resources. Task number two, efficient use, depends on the military elites. It's not a subject matter of our discussion to here at this conference, and I'm not competent in this matter at all. And the third pertains to the people. A task of any PSYOPs operation, according to any textbook, is to divide this triangle. The government, the army, and the nation. And it's clear that informational war actually brings its results. And in this regard, Russia is much more efficient than Ukraine is. In conditions of the market, we know that business can organize anything in the most efficient way. Therefore, the task of concentration of resources, like this task number one, is just about concentrating the enough financial resources. Of course, there are other tasks which cannot be obtained only through the market. You also need to get some weapons and munitions, especially when there are some limitations and some intergovernmental rules. And here I would like to quote Mises just once in my presentation. He writes that everything necessary for waging war must be provided by limited civilian consumption and using part of the available capital and working harder. Do we feel that civil consumption is limited? It seems to me those who are in the rear do not want to leave their comfort zone. And while in the first months of war, people were ready to tolerate anything, Now they complain about electricity cutoffs and so on and so forth. There's a whole movement against mobilization. The members of the compactation centers are called the human capturers, and some even call them the satanists. So they use the terms which don't give the nation a chance to survive. What concerns unproductive expenditures in conditions of an existential war, and I would like to stress this, it's not a war for some piece of territory. This is a matter of being or not being. So, in conditions of an existential war, unproductive expenditures are any expenditures that are not making our victory closer. When I speak about expenditures, it's not about private sector. The private sector has the right to use their property as they deem necessary. The private sector realizes the risks, and why when there is a house constructed in Lviv, those are private individuals assessing their risks and bearing the responsibility if a missile hits this building. The situation is different when we speak about public expenditures. And we have already mentioned here, it seems to me it was Yaroslav who mentioned the figure of 68% connected with, life connected with budget. And the policy there does not, make the population leave the comfort zone. And we can see that on the basis of expenditures. You can see that in 2022, in comparison to 2021, the peaceful expenditures increased by 110 by 10%. That's first year of war. In 23, in comparison to 22, that's the 23% increase. So it seems like the politicians believe that they have already obtained the victory and they have to think about the next elections. But the future is too indefinite. We have to understand that our future depends on the motivation of people who have weapons in their hands and who stand on the front line. And our politics can actually demotivate them significantly. When a warrior comes to Pokrovsk, where flower beds were made 2 months ago, he gets demotivated. When he goes to Kyiv with glass bus stops, he gets demotivated. When he comes to Lviv and he sees flowers in Strysky Park, and he gets demotivated because he sacrifices everything. He is ready to sacrifice his or her his life, and he sees that people in the rear are not ready to sacrifice even a bit of their comfort, and that can have horrific consequences for Ukraine. Speaking of governmental expenditures, public expenditures, we have to change the methodology, the values which lie at the basis of shaping the budgets of all levels. And the main value, which should become the equivalent of estimation of any expenditures, is the life of a soldier. In conditions of war, a life of a soldier is of higher value than the life of a person who is retired, than well-being of a university professor, than life of a child, because everything else depends on them. On conditions of war, no privileges can be granted. And again, I'm talking here only about the public sector. In conditions of war, privileges include not only high salary. In conditions of war, these unclear pensions, for example, which are higher than the pensions to the soldiers. This is also about the salary of the representatives of the budgetary sector, of a teacher, or of a researcher. If we want unity and the lack of demotivation of warriors, the first step is to decrease all peaceful expenditures. And that's about all articles of the budget. So we speak here about the governmental functions and all other functions. The country cannot afford having an official if we speak here generally about the existence of the country. What is more, preservation of the existing apparatus is the uh, direct threat to the national security and defense. The war actually demands concentrating everything on defense. The war makes the Ukrainian nation understand the purpose of the state, and the purpose of the state and its main function is its security. And that's what we proceed from. Everything else is a matter of freedom, and it has to be given to the market. And also, when we speak about such articles as the public order, or when we speak about the courts and so on. So, if you have a look at those links, like procurement of handcuffs, which you can see on Prozoro system, it seems like the state apparatus does not understand the disastrous state we are in right now. And speaking of the internal security, we have to speak about weapon ownership. And ownership of weapon is the guarantee for preservation of human rights. And this is also something that stops a potential aggressor, either internal or external. This is about education, this is about social protection. And I would like to stress one more thing when it comes to taxes. The decrease in non war expenditures can be accompanied by the decrease in taxes if we are serious about the question of war. The increase in taxes is acceptable in a situation when the existing revenues are not enough for defense purposes, but it's not admissible to preserve the expenditures of non-military character. Why? Because the decrease in taxes gives the economy the possibility to adapt to the new circumstances, and it will limit the possibilities of irrational use of resources, and it will allow for flexible financing of military expenditures. We have Metro here, and he can tell you how the UAV production is financed. This is only possible because the private sector still has funds for financing of this production. And if these funds are taken away, Ukraine will lose its flexibility and the advantage it has over Russia. And just two more things I have to say. Financing the war is undesirable at the expense of money emission because it disorients the economy and the citizens. But the emission causes even more damage when, in conditions of war, it is directed at financing peaceful expenses. So, the matter of the monetary regime and monetary policy is a big question. And the last thing, since I've already used all of my time, for Ukraine, this war has existential nature. This is the war for existence. But it seems to me it also has the transcendent nature. I'm not sure whether I'm using the term right. Maybe someone will help me with that. A question of coronavirus and lockdown. That was something that Ukrainian war actually got rid of. I can't imagine what condition the world would be in if it wasn't the Russo-Ukrainian war. Then the world becomes ever more right oriented, and I see a chance in that. The problem is that in Ukraine, when the right fight at the front lines, we have various leftists who use various grants to promote leftist ideology. But I'm sure this problem will also be solved in Ukraine. And I'll say a couple of words about God, because in times of war, you cannot but speak about God. There's no freedom without God. If there are no higher arguments, freedom can be easily destroyed. Let's recall the lockdown. Under the fear of death, you can break a person's will and any willingness to enjoy freedom. The Ten Commandments, for me, as a person who knows the evolutional theory of Friedrich von Hayek, Ten Commandments is the proof that God exists. And you, this war leads Ukraine to to the fact that the attitude to God will have an impact on the whole world. Thank you. I can't speak using the slides, but thank you, Vasil. Your questions? Yes, we have this question here, and then we'll take a question there. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question. I do agree with you in many regards, but when the society communicates with the government on social um, expenditures, they usually say that this is the money of international donors and partners. That's why we can spend this money on civilian sector, because this is financed by the international partners. And when it comes to the military expenditures, so we take the money from emission and so on, so we cannot decrease the expenditures. Well, it seems to me that a foreign taxpayer does not give money for the future elections. This money is earned by those people who are at the front lines. And it would be better if we used this money to shape some reserves of weapons, because the future is indefinite. It doesn't mean that, well, it's not an argument that this money should go to civilian purposes. I would like to stress once again that this war has an existential nature, and it requires us to reconsider these values and arguments. Just an explanation. The defense expenditures in 2023 were $27.5 billion. And when it comes to non military, that was $78 billion. We got $43.5 billion in credits. And in times of war, we have increased the public debt. And it's now 100% of GDP. It's a default situation when we do not decrease the non-military expenditures, but just are falling into the debt trap. This doesn't give us an answer to the solution. And this money is not given to us for free, but an IMF credit has 7.5% interest rate in foreign currency, and we have to understand that this money could have been used for drones, for missiles, and so on. But that's one thing. But when it's about, well, some cobblestones or about too expensive eggs, that's a different situation. Thank you. I have a controversial question to you. We know that when we invest into such businesses as, for example, flowers or cocktails or something, this gives a boost to our economy. The business is thriving, and the taxes go to the state budget. And that's where our military can get the resources for defense. This is my personal subjective opinion. I see some sense in investing our personal money as per individuals into such fields as, well, planting flowers, drinking cocktails, and so on. What do you think about that? Because I see here the prospects for our army. And I have another question. You spoke about the liquidation of power in the judiciary field and so on because of the corruption and other problems. So I wanted to ask you, What if we should not liquidate or decrease but introduce some values and educate these officials? In Zubra, not far from Lviv, there's a man who plants sakuras. He had many of those, and he decided to plant them there. And he does a great thing in times of war. When the same is done by a person who is called a public official at the expense of, at my expense or at your expense, this is a different thing, because we have bigger problems right now. He took the decision. Yes, he has the right to do so. An official doesn't have the right to do things like that in times of war. That's number one. What concerns the institutions, the government well, of power, I wasn't speaking about their abolishment. I was speaking about, well, decrease in numbers. So I think that, for example, that the judges cannot be paid for honestly. And for example, the retired judges cannot be paid for honestly, because in the normal world, a judge is a status. He is a model of dignity. While we have payment for honesty, high salaries for judges or high pensions for judges are the privileges, and while other people are dying at this moment, they cannot say you owe me and go to the constitutional court and fight for their rights, because that's demotivating those people who are sacrificing their lives. Speaking of expenditures, we are talking here not only about the fact that it's difficult to concentrate the necessary resources. We're speaking about the fact that actions of ours demotivate those who sacrifice their lives. And when those men will come back here, we will all suffer, because that will be reflected on us as well. So, in conditions of war, we shouldn't be speaking about other things. Because what is unity about? It's the unity of understanding, in our understanding of the threat. The private sector does not even celebrate loud weddings. Well, look who celebrates loud weddings. These are the children of the prosecutors and public officials. And so on. The private sector in conditions of war behaves very humbly, but the public officials don't. And one more short question. I'd like to go back to what you mentioned, and I would like to go back to Mises, because Mises and his biography, he also lived through the World War, and after the war, he was a member of the Reparations Commission, and as an academician, he was giving the recommendations to the Polish government of how to actually get out of this post-war crisis, and that was a deep crisis, and I hope Ukraine will not have a crisis like that, because basically Austria was on the verge of hunger and poor people had nothing to eat. So, what were the main recommendations of Mises to the Austrian government, and are they as relevant for Ukraine now as they used to be there? Well, you see, I'm not going to comment on that because I didn't study it in depth. I provided here the quotation about the war. I can explain that quotation. Well, there's no time for that. But well, the point is that increase in taxes. When Mises spoke about it, it made sense. Why? Because the share of the state was not 67%. I think that at that time it was probably 15% maximum. And at that time, you could speak about increasing taxes. Today, this huge governmental part prevents us from speaking about increasing taxes. We should speak about decreasing expenditures. And secondly, when we can't go to capital because a significant amount of capital is in various assets. And that's why Mises said that we have to resort to loans and then also hard work. Increasing taxes will kill hard work. we have to think. The economy is breaking down because of the fear of mobilization. We all were growing that fear. We started fighting for the rights. And no one will be fighting for rights and speaking about the constitution when the occupiers come to Lviv. And whatever they say, we will have to do that. So we created this problem ourselves. We will created the demotivation ourselves, and now we are in a kind of a catch-22 situation. And these situations should not only be solved through money, but what concerns the post-war period. Back in 2022, the office of the president was already thinking of how they will be spending this money. There were some meetings in Lugano and in other places. I hope that the system of courts will help ensure the rights of everyone who suffered, and those reparations should go to the victims, and where to invest this money, whether to rebuild their homes in Kharkiv or Avdiivka or to build homes in Lviv. That will be for the owners of the money to decide. So we need to have a market approach to restoration of future Ukraine.